initially with respect to whether or not Picardo would be here on behalf of his own application. The municipal land use law does not require that an applicant be here on behalf of his own application. In fact, it's very normal that the professionals for an applicant would make the application for it. Mr. Picardo relied on both his planner and his architect to make this application for him, and he certainly did sign and certify to everything in his application. With respect to the issue of the number of units, I certainly can't tell you that there are COs. Obviously, the file in the building department is completely empty, so I can't tell you that those exist. However, I think the issue is much more narrow than that. I think the issue is simply for this board to determine is whether or not before 2005 were there 5 units in this property being occupied, and whether or not before 2005, when the law changed, 5 units would have been permissible. I think it's clear that before 2005, under then current law, 5 units would have been permissible. And what we submit to you is that the leases that have been submitted, lower?
Yeah, it's just a little slow.
What I submit to you is that the leases that have been submitted and marked into evidence are proof that 5 units have in fact been occupied. 4 units have been occupied by tenants since before 2005, and 1 by Mr. Picardo and his wife. I don't think that if this board determines that those 5 units were pre-existing non-conforming uses, that that in itself absolves Mr. Picardo of any other possible consequence for not having a proper CO for something. If he doesn't, there's consequences that somebody other than this board may impose upon him. You are not absolving him of any potential consequence because you're making a determination that 5 units did in fact exist before 2005. Moving on to the issue of what the standards are for a D2 variance, I would submit to you that Mr. Cantos has misstated what the affirmative or positive criteria is. He suggested repeatedly that the standard is whether or not there's a public benefit. That is not simply what the standard is. The standard for special reasons is whether or not the application can carry out the purpose of zoning. That purpose can be carried out and satisfied by a number of different possibilities, one of which is there something in the master plan? Is there something in the city's ordinance that promotes or encourages, but by this application, encourages those recommendations in your master plan? Now, in fact, the planner did go over a number of recommendations in the city's master plan that are supported by this application. Essentially, what he was saying is that, especially in the historic district, the facilitation of appropriate reuses of buildings and uses of buildings is encouraged. Reinvestment in properties is encouraged, and encourages maintenance of the property. All of these things are being done by the improvements that are being made to this property. So I would suggest to you that the special reasons are something more than simply not whether or not there's a public benefit only. The standard is much more broad than that, and simply whether or not the purpose of zoning can be set forth by the application, and whether or not those purposes are promoted by the application. For the 1.25 feet on the one side, this building complies with the ordinance's bulk requirements in every other way. So the fact that it's 40 feet high in the back, the fact that it goes back as far as it does, those are all things that would be permitted if this were a 1 or 2 family use. Mr. Collin made the point that if that's the case, and the building envelope is being respected, but for that 1.25 feet, that it's really difficult to say that there's a substantial detriment to the public good, when in fact the ordinance permits essentially exactly what he's done, but for that 1.25 feet. He did also, in his testimony, discuss the side yard variances in some detail. We have 3.75 on one side, 2.8 on the other side. Obviously, you can have 0 and 5 under the current ordinance. What he was saying is if you added 2.8 and 3.75, you in fact have more than a total of 5, maybe not on the one side. But his point in why he thought that on balance this was a better suggestion than shifting the top floor of the building was that in terms of the integrity of the building and keeping its historic character, it made much more sense to keep the clean line, especially when we're talking about 1.2 feet. In addition, in the early testimony in September, we also discussed in the plan show that there's an easement on the side of the property where the 3.75 feet is. That easement is 2 feet. So if you were to look at the 3.75 and add a 2-foot easement, you in fact have 5.75 feet. So you have 5.75 on one side, 2.8 on the other side, which is actually better than what the ordinance requires. Set forth what the special reasons were. He gave ample reasons for why he supported this application. He in fact did talk about and describe in detail what he believed the negative criteria were and how they were satisfied. And I think he submitted a substantial proof that those things can be accepted. Lastly, with respect to the affordable housing obligations, I'm not adding any units here. So I don't think that although I haven't thoroughly researched it, I don't agree with Mr. Cantor that there is an obligation. But if there is, there's certainly no reason why this board can't impose that condition or some sort of compliance if they approve the application.